I am so happy to be here today with my colleague, Dr. Timothy Wilcox, who has joined our staff with a Ph.D. in English and a deep interest in creative technology. And Tim is my eager guest today. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, and thanks for bringing me onto the team.
Sure. We're thrilled. Um, so a few things that I want to tell people in advance. Um, Robofun, for those of you who may not know about us, is a company located on 102nd Street and Broadway in Manhattan. And we offer children creative ways to use technology. So we offer robotics and coding, both in Python and in Scratch. We work with 3 to 13-year-olds, and we brag about having small classes, and we like that. And right now we're in the throes of summer camp. If you go to robofun.org, sign up, you'll learn all about the things that are going on. We're doing summer camp. We're continuing to do a lot of private lessons and a lot of birthday parties right now. Our fall programs will be out shortly. And my social media folks keep saying, if people are watching, tell them to like us. So if you're out there, like us, the thumbs up kind of thing in social media. So Tim and I are going to talk a little bit about how he ended up where he is now and his thoughts about the past and the future of creative technologies. So let's start. Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so for the title is a little sort of broad, ambitious sort of thing. I grew up here in New York. I grew up in Queens. Really sort of committed into the sort of growth of the city and education here and so on. I had originally started out, attended Hunter College. I was studying for English secondary education, and eventually grew really into doing research for a while and sort of pursuing my Ph.D. in English and teaching in higher education for several years. And eventually started getting into, I was reading sort of older literature for a lot of that time, and then eventually started discovering these sort of newer forms of reading and writing that were really sort of deeply involved in digital technologies and so on, and getting really into this idea of, that I was really interested in studying like the history of literature, the history of, art and so on. But then getting really excited into sort of thinking ahead to, there's this really open space of like the future of this isn't just, here is, 100,000 new novels coming out in 2024 and 2030 and so on, but that there's all these sorts of different ways in which people can read and write and, to explore different sort of art forms and so on that are really sort of emerging, that have, come out in the recent decades, that are still being developed, that people are sort of just starting to work in and read in and so on.
So as we were prepping for this, you sort of explained this more to me. And I think it'd be interesting for our audience to hear more about, well, first of all, before we go into all of that, I just want to let our audience know that Tim has been brought on our team to help us manage. We have around 100 programs off-site every year. And every couple of years, we do a broad remake of all of our curricula, because the curricula keeps changing and the technologies keep changing. And so Tim is incredibly good at writing curriculum and editing. And so right now, Tim has had a big hand in our new Scratch curriculum and our new Python curriculum. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Tim, for your real sensitivity to what makes a good curriculum and for your fluid ability to write it well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's very exciting to work on this stuff. I've been really enjoying it so far, especially, with the robotics stuff, it's like this whole new set of things, and really get to explore,
right,
what is all the sort of potential in this, but then also the sort of, what will, mentors be able to do with it in the classroom, what will students be able to do with it at different grade levels,
right,
and really trying to make creative ways in which they can play around with this and learn through a sort of playing
Yeah. So we're in week 3 of 12 weeks of summer camp right now. And what we're seeing is, so before Tim came on full time, Tim was a mentor for us. And I worked on the curriculum all spring for both Spike and Python. And we would do various days with kids here and there. But it was full on the first week of summer camp to really test everything completely, even though we had tested it along the way. And we're all phenomenally excited by how much the kids are liking it. Both the Spike curriculum and Python. We have incredibly, no pun intended, but we really do have happy campers and happy staff teaching these new curricula. So let's get back to the title that we talked about, The Past and the Future of Creative Technology. You started talking about what you were seeing in a class with a child in Python, and you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, so before we started, you were asking me to explain a little bit about what I mean by sort of computer-based literature and things like that. And so, you have, so sort of like print-based works, for instance, or audio-based works, but so you have a book and it has like, linear sequence of pages and you go through it. And
okay, like a normal novel or like
yeah.
reading the normal novel via Audible or some other service. Yeah. Okay.
And so what you get with a computer is that you can start to interact with things in various ways. And so there's a wide swath of different types of sort of what's called electronic literature, digital literature. But so there's varying degrees by which things are sort of necessarily electronic. So you've had like print books in the past. It's like choose your own adventure, where it's like you read a section and it's like, if you want to do this, continue on to page 70. If you want to do this, continue on to page 80. And you can sort of do that, and you have this branching structure, and
which
it bounces around.
Kind of mimics programming.
Yeah, and so you had also going back into the 80s and so on, choose your own adventure games, text adventure games, where what's different on that environment is that you get to actually type things in, and it can sort of has these systems to parse what you're saying and try to figure that out. And so I was very excited to see in the Python classroom recently, you have these young kids, average age I think is around 10 or so in these classes, and they're writing in Python choose your own adventure stories where you have these branching structures and setting it up so that it gives you part of the story and you type something in, and then it gives you another part that follows along from that. And so this is sort of why I'm thinking a bit about the sort of future here, especially working with children, is there's all this sort of potential that as I said, you have stuff from the 80s, you have some examples that go back even further, you have some preliminary examples of like poetic works that are going back into like mid 50s in some cases. And so you have all these sort of different sort of things going on, and but it's still largely undeveloped. There's a lot of potential that's not explored. But I think seeing young kids working on this and working in it quite comfortably, you can see that fast forward 10, 20, 40 years, imagine much more experimentation in this way, much more sort of flexibility in that way. I don't think it's necessarily so true that this idea of like every few years is a new sense of like, oh, but now these are true digital natives and they'll just get everything just like that. I don't think it's sort of that quite so simple, which is sort of what's exciting about working in a program like this, which is you get to really sort of immerse them in it and guide them through here's how you can sort of approach this creatively and think about these sort of different projects you can work on, and really get them sort of experimenting around with different sort of hardware and software and so on, and really learning to do new things that in their daily life they wouldn't necessarily learn to do.
So what's interesting is, so as a former teacher, choose your own adventures were something really engaging for kids, and now they're making choose your own adventures, and you mentioned the idea of digital natives versus me or even you as a digital immigrant, and the children we work with are not. They are digital natives, but you're kind of pushing it in a different direction in that even though they are digital natives, things are happening so quickly that uh, when somebody is born or becomes cognizant of computers, it's going to continue to change. So the term natives is almost too broad. A native born in the 90s, a native born in the 2000 zeros. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's something I think about where it's like, you're growing up in different sort of very different contexts.
Right.
And, in my case, I got a computer first, or my family did, when I was around 12. And, it was one big, desktop computer that, we all sort of rotated around and shared.
Yep.
But, that was interesting to me where it's like that becomes like sort of like getting into that world becomes part of like my adolescence where that's sort of just like almost a sort of natural progression for me, which is as I'm sort of getting older and starting to like be able to work more independently and like learn things and discover new hobbies and socialize more freely and so on, getting into the sort of online world. But you have different sort of context people are growing up into, and even within generations people sort of look at more things. And so sometimes we'll have students who they're actually know a lot about Scratch. They're very familiar with it. And
right.
Sometimes it's quite surprising to me how much students come in sort of knowing and thinking about these things, where it's like, I know that the average, if I went around interviewing people in the street, the average person that age wouldn't necessarily know a lot about Scratch, but we sort of, I guess, self-select in a way for the people who are interested in this stuff. But interesting to see, growing up with these things where, in my case, it's like I had those experiences growing up, but it was also like in, middle and high school and so on, my computer classes were like, here's how to use Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel and like, just very basic formatting of a document and saving a file and things like that. And, a lot of stuff that learned independently, but, seeing how much more people are learning now, and then through this program, making sure that they're seeing the sort of creative ends of it as well.
Right. Well, that's a big goal at Robofun, and I think something that attracted you to it from a humanities background um, was that we really try to weave the science, the tech, and creativity. And if you look at major figures in tech or in science, like Richard Feynman or Einstein, they always seem to have a lot of hobbies in a lot of different areas. And I know with myself that to be strong at running my business, I have to make sure to sort of exercise my mind in many areas. So we're thrilled to have you with us, Tim. And before you were with us, and after you got your PhD, you were also doing some graduate teaching or some teaching of undergraduates. Is that right?
Yeah, I was teaching undergraduates at Stony Brook University for several years, and then I was at the Fashion Institute of Technology for a bit before I started here, or actually that was sort of overlapping quite a bit when I was part-time there, part-time here as a mentor.
Sure.
Interesting sort of dynamic working with these very different sort of age groups.
Right. Well, actually, that was where I was going. Like, what do you notice college students versus our little ones? And as a mentor, we call our teachers mentors, for those who may not be aware of that. What ages have you taught so far?
I've taught a broad range, I guess mainly first through eighth, I guess.
That's a good range.
Yeah. So, I've done some little coders, which is they're in Scratch Junior, or actually kindergarten and first grade for
Okay.
little coders. And then, then they get into Scratch. And I haven't taught the Python classes, but I've been observing them and seeing how that goes. And, I've done junior robotics and the sort of older robotics, and I did stop motion. And so some of the robotics classes are sixth through eighth grade in one program I was in.
Yep.
And the stop motion, I think there was a fifth grade class, and very different sort of dynamics. Also sort of generally different context, in the sense of for the college students, it's like they have to get a grade, they have to get a degree, they're in a bunch of different classes, and they have their own sort of adult lives. Many of them have jobs, particularly I was teaching in the state university of New York system, and then
Yep.
Fashion Institute of Technology and so on. So you have like a lot of students who are like working and so on. Whereas the kids, it's sort of interesting. I mean, some of the after school programs are a little tired at the end of the day, but in general, this is a sort of fun respite from the more serious studies and so on. And so, even though I was teaching English literature, and for some students they love the class, it's always there's a level of, oh, but I have to do this paper, and if I don't do well on it, then it's going to be disaster and so on. So I think that there's a little less sort of stress in that way. It's nice to get sort of students sort of just working on things and really rolling with what sort of interests them, where they go with it. But also, keeping them on track, where it's like, we're not just going to stack as many Lego pieces together as we can for 3 hours. We do eventually want to learn how these sensors work, for instance. We want to do these things, and really trying to guide them into like, but you're going to have a lot of fun though once you learn how this color sensor works. You're going to love it.
Right.
So let's see how that works.
So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing with kids learning about color sensors, because there's been a lot of activity in our studio. Okay, so for those of you just joining, we're using a brand new system from Lego. It's called the Spike, and it's replacing the EV3 system. And its sensors are really easy to use. And a sensor is basically an input device that will tell the computer something about the environment. And in the case of a color sensor, it will read a range, which will tell it, oh, it's a yellow or it's a blue. That's a very broad way of explaining it. But so what are you seeing as you're observing and helping in classes?
Yeah, I mean, the new color sensor also is actually really great, because I was using the older Lego robotics system in the past school year. And one thing they added is now it has like a big bright light on it, so you can actually see colors and things like that much more clearly, much more easily in various conditions, right? So that's always one of the challenges, is like, here's like the ideal, and then like you get into a classroom and maybe it's like not bright enough to like determine like if it's this color or that color.
Right. So Lego improved it, so it's a much brighter. Yes, that was always an issue. Yeah.
And that, so so students are, I think, having a really good time, really figuring these things out. And so you could do like, they do various projects. So one of them, you have this thing. It's like it could be like a dog, or this week was underwater week, and so one of our mentors made it into a crustacean, and it has like a little color sensor. It can see different colored blocks. The new set also, it's much more varied in its colors as well, and so you can sort of set up different sort of elements of your building, and you can see if it sees red, it plays a sound, it does this light show, it does these movements. You could set up all sorts of different things, and so you could set up complex machines that, like, it'll drive around. One student, last week when we were doing deep space, he had his little Mars rover, had a color sensor.
I just want to say for our audience, every week has a theme. So this week was underwater, last week was deep space, and half my staff dressed as Star Trek characters for costume day. Costume day is every Wednesday. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, so he built his color sensor down facing the ground below his robot. This is also where the light really comes in, because it's like, otherwise it'd be completely obscured in shadow.
Mhm.
And he had it kind of a little elevated, so I was driving over, like he kind of spilled like a bunch of his pieces onto a little whiteboard and let the drive over, and it's like had variables where it was counting out, like it sees a green block, but detected grass, it sees a blue block, it detected ice, it sees, purple block, this is some sort of anomaly. and
So
and
kind of like one of the probes going to Mars or going, yeah. Okay. Keep going.
or it could just be like, you have it set up so like it's moving through different colors, and it becomes like you're creating a score for a song and dance system, and it's like
Right.
you're setting up these sort of sequences through color that translate into different things. And I mean that sort of broadly is, I guess, what's sort of really cool about this is, you know they're having a lot of fun playing with Legos, but they're learning what, especially looking back to my own experience, seems to me very advanced for their ages, sort of deep intuitive understanding of like conditional logic and
Yep.
things like that,
Yep. Yep.
and how to set up these sorts of creative projects. Right, that was sort of part of how I got interested in literature and really fell in love with that, is uh, this like moment where it really kind of clicked for me. I actually, like, growing up, I wasn't a big reader until like my second year of high school. I generally tried to get out of doing my reading assignments and so on.
Avoid it at all costs, kind of thing.
Not necessarily at all costs, but
Right.
definitely wasn't very studious with it. But
Yeah.
one day it sort of clicked, where we're in a class lecture going over symbolism and metaphors and all of that. And so part of it was, I really kind of really liked just sort of learning about figurative language and getting into this sense of different ways that language can work and express sort of different things and so on. But what really kind of wowed me was this. It was like the first time I think I really kind of got a sense of a very like large scale creative project, or a large scale project of any sense, really, where a lot of schooling is, you have units, and you need to learn the stuff in the unit. You take a test, maybe there's a bigger end of year test or something,
Right.
and you're trying to meet these sorts of learning goals and so on. And so you just do, like, your coursework for the week, you do your homeworks, and you do a test, and it's like, okay, now the next thing. But a novel is something that really struck me, where it's like it's such a big undertaking, where you have all this different elements of world and character and plot, and all these sorts of literary elements of like symbols and metaphors and recurring sort of themes, and the dynamics where this character relates to this other character, and it builds out this whole thing. And really sort of wowed with like really how that's all set up, how much goes into that, and how well, at least in like the major examples we were reading in class, it all sort of tends to blend together. And wanting to like learn so much more about that. And it's sort of cool to see and work through when I was a mentor, and work through in developing out these sort of curriculum lesson plans and so on. These projects that here in the summer camps, it's like taking place over a week, or some of them are like 2 to 3 day projects, and they do another 2 to 3 day project, where it's like, okay, you're going to build this drawbridge, and then you get to like do this other thing with the drawbridge, and then you do this other thing, and you go through these different challenges, and it's like you're building out something and building on top of it, and adding in all sorts of different elements. um Sorry, one
Yeah.
second.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely really, really exciting. We lost Tim for a moment. I'm not sure if the internet in the office right now is having a little issue. Are you still there? Just not your picture, Tim? Well, when
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. I just think someone wanted to grab something.
that's okay. It's okay. We can't see your picture yet. And you can, it's okay for people to see people in the background. That's fine. But until we see Tim's picture back, I just wanted to say that what really resonated about what Tim just said is relevance. And in education, something clicked for Tim in high school, where he it was interesting, and symbolism and relevance. It seems like, maybe, unless I'm putting words in your mouth, that was a click moment where it seemed kind of relevant to your own life. Is that possibly true?
I think for me, it was less about relevance, although that does come in a bit later. But just the initial thing is just the sense of like ambitious scale of the project,
Uh-huh.
and that was something. I mean, growing up, I really didn't really have a lot of outlets for that. But then seeing in these classes, for instance, we have our blueprints and we have our lessons and so on, but there's also a lot of room for students to be like, like with the Mars rover thing I was describing, that's not a challenge that we had laid out. That's something the student was like, oh, what if I did this? And really get to build that out
Right.
with the sensors, with the code, testing
Yep.
it out, revising it,
Yep.
having all these sort of different interacting moving parts. And so that, in terms of relevance, I guess this is sort of how I sort of got into sort of computer-based writing in a way. Is I had been studying sort of 19th century British literature, which has some elements of relevance, but is sort of not what my life looks like. And I had been interested in I had growing up all these sort of online experiences, and got kind of curious, like, so how do people write about stuff like that though? Because that would look very different than like sort of 1800 social interactions I was seeing in those novels. How do people describe those sorts of things? And I kind of naively assumed I could pick up any contemporary novel, and people would have cell phones and smartphones, and they'd be on sort of social media, and have email, and electronic calendars, and all sorts of conveniences that sort of govern modern life. But that turns out to be not true, especially in the early 2010s when I first started sort of digging into this. Increasingly sort of not true that that average novel would get into stuff like that. And so that sort of eventually, digging into that, got recommended. There are these digitally based literary works as well. And so there's the Electronic Literature Organization has it was 2 at the time. Now it's 4 volumes of what's called the Electronic Literature Collection, if people want to really dive deep into all
Okay,
sorts of
so
examples.
we're getting ready to wrap up, but this is really great stuff. And maybe if you can give me the URL, I'll put it in our chat, and people who are watching or can go to it. So where should they go if they want to learn more about this? You're looking up the URL? Okay, maybe you can, I don't know if you can see the chat and add it to the chat, or you can add it to the private chat. So I think one of the cool things, while you're trying to figure that out, of what you just talked about, that really made me very excited as the business founder and owner. Okay, I'll throw that over. Is that the way we develop our classes is not that every unit A, B, C, D, E, and there's room for exploration. So there's room for, oh, I have this cool idea. Can I go in this direction, Mr. Tim, in my class? Which is the example you gave with the Mars rover. And to me, those moments can sometimes be as important as the curriculum that we're doing, because it's about ownership. It's about the kids owning what they're learning and taking it to the next level. So I think that's the thing that in the last 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks, we've been so excited about, is so much ownership. And this is first graders through sixth graders. We have the morning group of first and second, and then in another room, third, fourth, and fifth. And they're just having a blast with this and owning our curriculum for what they want to do with it. And it's super exciting. So, but tell us a little bit about about this URL that we just put up.
Oh yeah, this is so Electronic Literature Organization has all various resources in terms of the study of what's called electronic literature. So like stuff that's inherently electronic, couldn't just sort of print it out and read it on the train or whatever. But they have a series of collections of various works, and they categorize it by genre. So you have like text adventures, you have hypertext fiction where it's like, you know, you have, instead of pages, hyperlinks, creates a web of things. You have sort of poetic works that have like variable text, and you have, you know, unfortunately, especially in the earlier ones, a lot of now defunct Flash projects. So the Flash player
Right.
support ended recently, but each work in there has a comment from the artist and a comment from the editors that gives a really great intro into, like, you know, I've never read anything like this before. What is going on here? I don't know what to make of this. And you can kind of get a sort of basic intro to, like, you know, what's going on, how does it work, you know, why is it sort of interesting, you know, is there a precedent for this, you know, things like that.
So I think, Tim, we should have you come back in a month or two and walk us through one of these pieces of writing, or pieces of electronic literature. I think that could be a fun thing to do together. Do you have a favorite? And I'm guessing that whatever you have can change depending on how you're reading it. I'm a little bit, I have to go do it to be able to speak more articulately about it.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I have various sort of interests. My favorite is a sort of longer thing that's not in one of those collections, but that, you know, I've spent a lot of time on in my dissertation. But this like text adventure, Mind Forever Voyaging, which I worked on because it takes its title from William Wordsworth, who's a, you know, late 18th, early 19th century poet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of really fascinating where it's like you play as this AI that's going through, you know, a decade at a time, looking at the consequences of a like political economic plan and seeing what that does in society. And it's like this very ground level look about, you're walking around a small town and you have to record, like, what does it look like to eat in the diner, and, you know, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what does it look like to go to, like, you know, the movies, or what does it look like, you know, to visit the local university, or
Right.
things like that. And it's like it's this sort of foundational work where you have a lot of early text adventures. There's like puzzles where it's like, oh, I need to get the round blue key, and that goes to this like blue orb, and, you know, things like that, or, you know, more
It
complicated
sounds a little
examples.
bit like an escape room on the computer in some ways.
Yeah, but so this was an early example that, for the most part, there's a sort of couple counter examples in it, but most of it is not puzzle. There's like point system, you know, you need to get like 30 points to advance out of like a possible like 50 or 60. And so you get this freedom to just sort of explore this town and say, you know, I got to record that. That seems very significant. So that tells you something about what's going on in the society. And, you know, generally has various points about, like, you know, if you see the newspaper, maybe it doesn't have the correct punctuation 20 years from now. That's maybe a minor thing. But if you, you know, show up to, you know, the university and it's like in complete ruins, it's maybe worth a little more points, and things like that.
Wow. Wow. Well, you are sharing with us a world I know nothing about, and it's something I want to work with you on. When do you think kids are going to be experiencing this kind of thing? Or I guess maybe you're saying, well, they already are. They're doing it in Python, but
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and I think there's, like, if you go through the collection, that's maybe a lot of it's very much more geared toward adults. I think there are examples of things that are a little more kid friendly. There's one scholar, Mark Marino, who's really interested in children's electronic literature, for instance, and has worked on things with his children and so on. But I think, you know, there are these things that kids are working on Scratch, for instance, and they're developing their own projects and they're playing other projects. But I think that, you know, there's sort of less of a system. That's sort of one of the general things that fascinates me is I think there's a lot, you know, to this world of creative technology that's not easily categorized according to like what we have inherited from like the 20th century and so on. And a lot of stuff that slips through the cracks where, you know, you'll have people will read, you know, complicated online text and so on, and don't really know where next to go from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you're letting me become aware of this really interesting new world. And I'm going to ask you to come back and talk to us more and show us more. But at this point, we're going to wrap up. And I want to just give you, first of all, welcome aboard. You're our newest full-time employee, and we're all so happy to be working with you. And for our audience, Robofun offers creative technology classes with the goal of helping children love to learn. And I see the fact that they're learning robotics or coding or animation or circuitry through Minecraft as really Trojan horses to activate their ownership of their learning. So check us out. We're at robofun.org. We're also at 102nd and Broadway. You're also welcome to wander in and see a class in action, although we are being very, very COVID careful. But come see what we're up to. And it's robofun.org. And again, Tim, thanks, and have a wonderful long weekend.
Yes, thank you for having me on. Good to talk to you.